What up, Party Peeps? Today we're talking to Dr. Dan Pardi, who's a neuroscientist and the Chief Health Officer of Qualia. Today we're talking about their stem cell product, and we learn all about stem cells, what they are, how they work, what their pathway is, the difference between stem cell therapy and stem cell supplementation. And at the very end, Chloe and I decide whether or not we think it makes sense for you guys to try out Qualia stem cell. And what we decided was,
hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Decision Lab podcast. Today, we are talking to Dr. Dan Pardi. He is the Chief Health Officer of Qualia Life. Dan, welcome. We're so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Chloe and Cody. I'm delighted to be here. I really like what you're doing, so excited about this one.
heck yeah. So you weren't always at Qualia. Tell us a little bit about how you got here, a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I've been at Qualia for, maybe 6-8 weeks, something like that. I'm still quite new, but my interest in health started a long time ago. I've tried to pinpoint when that was. I think it was in high school when I was an athlete. I hurt myself, and so I had to start thinking about my own body in a different way. I had to pay attention. How do I get back onto the playing field? And then that ended up starting a real interest in health sciences. So I became like the de facto sports performance coach from my teammates. They were always asking me questions about, simple things like, is Gatorade good? And like that. And so I would be reading about it. It led to me then taking a bunch of different courses in college to figure out what angle is it that I would like to pursue. Is it sports medicine? Is it medicine? Eventually, I settled in exercise physiology and then pursued a master's in exercise physiology from Florida State, which is really a great program. And then from there, I ended up going and doing some research in prostate cancer with lifestyle with Dr. Dean Ornish, and then went to work in bioinformatics at a company called Double Twist, where we were trying to become the first to sequence the human genome for the first time in competition with NCBI and also Craig Ventnor's organization Celera. So that was really exciting. From there, went into the pharmaceutical space, did sales for a little bit, for like a year, but my science leanings pulled me in a different direction, which was great. But I liked having that interface with the doctors. But then I was the first member of medical affairs for that company called Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So I grew that department to 25 people, started what medical affairs does is post-marketing support for approved products. Medical affairs didn't always exist. And so what you'd have is a situation where clinical development and research would do the various stages of research to get a product into existence. And then it would just hand over to marketing. And there were issues because of that, because they needed more scientific support once the product hit the market. That's where medical affairs came in. I did that for about a decade. And then our company was focused on narcolepsy and sleep. I knew nothing about either of those subjects when I joined the company. Quickly fell in love with both of them, started to write some scientific papers, got some really cool support from key opinion leaders who encouraged me to do my PhD, which I then did at Leiden in the Netherlands and then at Stanford in California. And then at the same time, funny enough, I was starting my PhD, but knowing that I did not want to become a sleep researcher, but also having some clear questions that I wanted to address. But what I was interested in was public health. So I was hearkening back to my time working with Dean Ornish and thinking, all right, how do we create interventions? What are the different ways that we can influence people to live healthier? So I created a behavior model called the Loop model to adopt and sustain health behaviors. And I presented that at Stanford Medicine X and Health 2.0. And then that became the basis of a health tool called HumanOS that I created. And so I was working on that startup and my PhD at the same time. And then a couple of years later, I was working with all sorts of organizations, helping, VCs, other groups in, the financial world, small startups to huge companies like Workday and Salesforce. And then eventually I met with a company called Restore Hyper Wellness. And they had a fleet of 250 centers around the United States that were, in their words, democratizing these tools that athletes were using for health betterment. And I thought it was a really exciting opportunity. So I joined them as their chief health officer and then moved to Austin and was there for a while, but they wanted to go into a different direction of performance medicine, which I think is definitely interesting and cool. I, though, know myself, I'm really interested in scientific wellness and lifestyle. So I said, replace me. I'll stay on as a consultant. I'll help out. I'll help train that next person. But if you're going to be doing prescribing, find somebody who does prescribe as an MD for all sorts of reasons. And so that's what happened there. And then last November, I met up with James Schmachtenberger, the CEO of Qualia. We'd actually been friends for almost a decade. We met a long time ago. I watched their journey, love their products. And he said, Dan, please come. We'd love to hear you talk about the science of health span and health and our products to the public. And so I joined them, like I said, two months ago, and it's been great being here.
So what does it mean to be the chief health officer of a company, or I guess of a company in general, but specifically Qualia?
Okay, that's a great question, because I think many more companies need a chief health officer. So if you're an executive at a company, you are essentially the leadership for a particular line of business. But if you sit around an executive table, there's all sorts of decisions that are being made that are influencing operations and all sorts of strategic decisions to help the company be healthy. But is there also a role that is looking out for the well-being of the people who are working there? And so when you're really dealing with companies of like 1,000 people or more, you need to have somebody who is saying, okay, how do the decisions that we make that can impact the company, impact the people that are helping to create the company? So that's at a bigger company. In my role, smaller company, over 40 people, but not 1,000, it's really about helping to establish and deliver a strategic vision that helps people become smarter about their health and have a deeper understanding of how to navigate the morass of the wellness industry. And make decisions that align with their perspective, because there isn't one right answer. It's up to all of us to establish, our own relationship with it in a way that feels good.
Got it.
Do you have a system for exactly how you would help somebody navigate their own wellness? Like a kind of a step-by-step protocol you follow?
Well, so I'm working on a book right now, and the book is an exploration into the question of health itself. Because when we don't have a very clear understanding of a particular area, particularly one as broad and encompassing as the field of health, it opens up the doors for, let's say, fractional definitions to dominate, like, for example, in medicine. And medicine does great work, but it's not a comprehensive, complete healthcare system. So we talk about it as our healthcare system, but it's really delivering sick care. And that has definitely led to a perception and instinct in people who now are kind of pushing back against medicine, unfortunately, and saying, like, wait, there's a lot more. And so you almost have this tension between the wellness side and the medicine side, as though both don't get it. And the reality is we need both. And we need people, and we need, those different arms to work in harmony for the individual. So I am looking to champion a new role in our healthcare system called the health performance expert, which would be equivalent to your primary care doctor, your PCP, your expert generalist, the first person that you go and speak to, who then has that expertise across all sorts of domains, can hear you, give you, good direction. But if you think about the differences between sick care and self-care, sick care is a lot about treatment, right? We want to diagnose and assess a condition that you're dealing with, and then we're evaluating you for the appropriateness of a medication or combination of medications, another diagnostic or more information about what's going on, or a referral to another person in the sick care network. That's it. A tip out the door to remember to eat right is not ever going to be effective. Now, that has led to the perception that health in general is an inscrutable domain. Like, we just can't affect people, but we're just taking the wrong tactic on how to get there. What we need is then people on the self-care side that work much, much differently. And they are actually training to embed you with knowledge so that you can make decisions and navigate your own life with skill. And that is a lifelong journey, right? That is not a tip or a treatment. That is training, right? So that is how I think about the bigger picture, that this is a lifelong journey. We all have to create many protocols in our own life, depending on the decade of life we're living through. Our needs, challenges, motivations, they all change as a part of the natural life history for humans, right? We are different people, not only cellularly, but also by our perspective and our goals as we enter into different decades of life. And so health itself is not something that you can take a course on and then forget. It is a process goal that doesn't have an end state. It's something that you need to continually refine across the lifespan and hopefully get better at, so that your efforts yield a very high rate of return in terms of the time that you're putting into it, time, money, et cetera. So yeah. And then the other thing I'll say is that we're always learning new things. 20 years ago, no models of health included circadian rhythms or the gut microbiome. And now we know those areas are instrumental in our health. and we need to take care of them as well. And so we have to also upgrade our own program in response to the upgraded knowledge base that is constantly evolving. So yeah, it's a big challenge, and the right way to do it, I think maybe the key message here is you have to make it fun, right? You are much more likely to participate in it regularly when you enjoy it. And I think a secret is those who do it well have health as their hobby. It's their passion. It's what they look forward to doing on the weekends. It's the things that they look forward to. Making a healthy meal for their family at night is not a homework. It's something they look forward to. That's how I think we're successful. And I think the real way to do it is to start with kids. Right now, our hope is that we have kids develop a relationship with how to navigate the environment, and then we try to reverse that later in life. Instead, I think we need to teach kids from a very early age how to, in school, I mean, you could argue that 50% of school time should be dedicated to how to be healthy, because you're learning what other information are they going to learn in school that is going to have such an impact on their day-to-day experience for the rest of their life. Right?
And the things they're learning. Like if they're not sleeping, they're not going to be reconsolidating the stuff that they're learning.
Yes,
it affects that too.
100%. That's such a great point. Not only is it valuable information on its own right, it's also accelerating the learning of everything else you're trying to learn and develop. Yeah.
Wow. I cannot wait to read this book. That's that's awesome. If you need help promoting it, let me know. I'm happy to post about it. That'd be awesome. That sounds cool. like awesome. How much of that do you think will be AI companions?
Ooh. Yes. So that is absolutely a rich question. And I can imagine in the future that, really a lot of the guidance that we do want to communicate, of course, you can personalize it for people at different times of life and different situations, but a lot of the information is the same. So imagine people at different times of life responding differently to an AI agent that captures their interest. So a little kid speaking to a cartoon that in a way where it feels like, entertainment and interesting. Then later on, a, teenage boy speaking with a heterosexual boy speaking with a female health coach who's like, wow, she's really got my attention. And she's delivering really good, positive information, teaching this boy how to have a healthy day, right? Remember to take care of yourself, like all sorts of good things, versus somebody much later in life where the avatar is somebody from earlier, an earlier generation where they have positive feelings, like an old musician or something that looks like a time in their life that was really exciting for them. All sorts of ways that you could then take an avatar and have that be a really key part in getting a person to actually take part in these health activities.
Couldn't agree more. It is my life mission to build something like that, like a Rosetta Stone companion type Jarvis thing that meld itself to anyone's needs, wants, and desires and stuff. So yeah, that's awesome. I like that. How does when did your passion for some of the stuff that Qualia does come in? Let's move into that. Tell us a little bit about Qualia. Like, what is Qualia in general, and then let's talk about stem cells.
Sure. Qualia is a company that started probably in earnest, I think 2014. It didn't actually go to market until a couple of years, but James Schmachtenberger and Daniel Schmachtenberger, two brothers, super intelligent guys, really wonderful people in general, started to create a nootropic stack or a cognitive enhancing stack. And their methodology was to say, how do we support all the systems involved in the different cognitive domains that we care about? Not just one, not just concentration, but how are we affecting executive functioning, working memory, thinking speed, all sorts of stuff, right? Arousal, vigilance, attention, all of that. And so they worked on it for a while, and eventually they felt they had something good enough that they wanted to bring it to market. So they started a company with Jordan Hall. Those are the founders of that company. And their first product, called Qualia, in fact, the company was named Neurohacker Collective. The product was called Qualia. And that became, for those in the know, people's favorite supplement in that cognitive space. I took it. It was a 2-step product. So you take 3 pills right when you woke up, and then after a meal, you take 6 more horse pills. And when I say horse pills, they were like really big. I don't have any problem taking pills. Lots of people do. I respect that. And so what I liked about that product is that you felt a noticeable elevation across your thinking for that day without feeling any major crash at all. I could sleep well when I was on it, and they advised taking it 5 days in a row and then 2 days off. And on the weekends, I did not feel desaturated. slow-minded. In fact, I felt an elevation compared to what I could recall from a baseline not on it at all. So like, this is really a true nootropic. And the difference between a nootropic and a cognitive enhancer is that a cognitive enhancer might not necessarily make the brain healthier, but it might make it perform better in the moment. But a nootropic is one that actually makes the brain healthier, at least signs that it's making it healthier over time. So it felt like it was living up to that ideal of being a real nootropic. And so, yeah, so that's the foundation of the company. What I really liked about it is that they were not trying to override a system by loading in a huge amount of an ingredient, but to say, all right, the first thing we're going to do is try to understand all the systems involved. And then how can we support the system to do its job? We're not going to try to override it. We're going to support it. I think that's a wise methodology. That philosophy, if you will, led to subsequent formulations in new areas. And an area that they've gotten into recently is trying to address health span. So things that are affecting an elevated level of health deeper into the lifespan. And obviously there are now these hallmarks of aging, which are not real, they're how we age, not maybe why we age, but they are reliable markers that have captivated many in the research community to understand them better and also to figure out ways that we can intervene. And the idea is that if you can slow down some of these primary drivers, you could have a really positive impact on even delaying disease. You could, like I said, you can support a higher level of health deeper into the lifespan. And what we know is that it's very unlikely there's not going to be a silver bullet. It's going to likely come through supporting different systems that we know are consequential in accelerating aging. And so the future of, supplemental care in this area is going to be a multi-product solution. But that's where they've been kind of digging into. And they've got a senolytic product to clear out senescent cells, a mitochondrial support product, one that supports NAD, and then a new one that just came out a couple of days ago to support stem cells. And I really like the approach that we're taking on that.
Interesting. Can you, what are some of the hallmarks of aging that you were just describing? What are some of those signs?
Yeah. So hallmarks of aging, this was a paper in 2013, June, by 5 researchers, but the 2 names that are most discussed are Lopez-Otten and Guido Kromer. So Lopez-Otten is from Spain, and Guido Kromer, I believe he's in France now, but they put out this paper that quickly became one of the most cited in the last decade for Cell. So it's had over 17,000 references to it. It's an enormously popular paper. And what it did is it changed the industry. It changed the industry because, I love the saying, it's not mine, no model is perfect, but some are useful, right? And so it's wonderful when you can have a model, even if it's not perfect, but it stimulates conversation, where you have science writing in, this is BS, there's more hallmarks of aging than the 9 that you've listed, and how did you decide just on these? But you get that. That's a good sign, because people are using your paper as sort of like the basis of a conversation. This one's stuck. So some of those hallmarks are, and by the way, a decade later, a new paper came out, same list of 5 authors. This is 2020, same journal Cell, and it was hallmarks of aging and expanded universe. They added 3 more, and they also categorized them. But just to give you a sample of a couple of them. So some of them would be genomic instability. This is where we see DNA damage that is not fully cleaned up, essentially. And so you have the genomic instability, which means, and I'll give you an example of something that kind of hits home for me, that every cell contains all of our genetic information, and every cell in the human body undergoes 1 million molecular lesions per cell per day, just due to normal metabolic processes and environmental stressors. So that's a lot of damage to clean up. And we have our DNA damage response that is involved in doing that. But over time, it's imperfect. And so there is a chance for higher mutations, and that's one of them, right? We have this genomic instability. We also have telomere attrition. Telomeres are the end caps at the end of our genes, and they shorten with every cycle of replication. So that's another one. You have senescent cells. So senescent cells are something that we have a product for, and the reason why is because senescent cells play a valuable role in our physiology. A cell will go into senescence as a way to avoid it becoming cancerous. So we do not want to stop the process of senescence. But what happens is that as a cell goes into senescence, it will release a lot of inflammatory contents into its surrounding, and that's called the SASP, the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. This is named by Judith Campisi at the Buck Institute. She is really one of the people that brought this whole line of research into existence. She identified the different factors that you could identify for how a cell is a senescent. She named the SASP. So what the SASP does is these inflammatory markers go into the surrounding area and it tells the immune system, hey, there's some damage here, come clean it up. And so during perfect homeostasis, when you're younger, you make senescent cells, they release those contents, the immune system comes and cleans them up, and the net burden of senescent cells in the body is neutral. As you get older, however, you undergo something called immunosenescence, which means your immune system becomes less good at doing its job. One of its jobs is in cleaning up senescent cells. So on one hand, you're making more senescent cells due to a variety of factors of other hallmarks. So all the hallmarks of aging contribute to each other, right? They're all interacting, interrelating.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, yes. Enormously complex. And so you're making more and you're cleaning up fewer. And so the level of senescent cells is now not staying neutral, but rising. And then that contributes to a chronic state of low-grade inflammation in the body. Now, inflammation is a idea that, it's like a dirty word, right? Inflammation is bad. What we want these inflammatory markers in our body just in the right amounts, because inflammation is it's a communication system, and it's playing a really valuable job. But when the level of detectable inflammatory markers like IL-6 or TNF-alpha, et cetera, when those rise, they're having to speak louder to get their message across. And as a result, then that disrupts the signaling within and outside of a cell. So chronic inflammation is, unfortunately, we see in actually some hunter-gatherer communities where they do not show elevated levels of inflammatory markers later into life. So is it a inevitable component of aging, or is it a component of aging in a moderate environment? Maybe more likely that. So maybe it is something that we can actually even address. But generally, that's the problem with senescent cells. And a senolytic, that line of research started between 2010 and 2020, and that was the attempt to use drugs and nutraceuticals to cause those senescent cells to go into arrest, to cause them to either go into arrest or to apoptosis and die. Because the apt name for senescent cells is zombie cells. They're not contributing functionally to your tissue, but they are still alive and they're causing problems.
Right. Causing the immune system come check this out, increase the inflammation. How do they know? How could you possibly know the number of senescent cells that those supplements or nutraceuticals would attack that would be good or bad necessarily? Because some level is good, too much is bad, too little is bad. How do you figure that out?
Yes, it hasn't been.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So the whole field is called senotherapeutics. And you have xenomorphics, which is an attempt to render the senescent cell inert. So you're not killing it, but you're also making it secrete less inflammatory factors. You have senolytics, trying to then kill the cells and make them go away. And what we do know is that the rate of senescent cells is not uniform throughout the body with aging. So we have different amounts of senescent cells in different tissues. And we've not yet identified a single marker that is reflective of the total state in the body. But we do, without exactly knowing how, at least in preclinical research, we do see that when you clear out senescent cells, for example, with compounds that are not even experimental but familiar, either usually had been ascribed to cancer treatments, so things like dasatinib and navitoclax, those types of compounds can help mice live 35% longer. Now, that wouldn't mean that we would live 35% longer, but the way that I would interpret, first of all, that is actually pretty good, even for rodent models. That's actually a meaningful extension of lifespan. And for us, it probably means if it did translate 1-to-1, that we would be less likely probably to die prematurely through poor health, and again, a higher level of health deeper into the lifespan, even if it didn't affect the maximal lifespan of us as humans. So still pretty valuable. And we know that a variety of compounds, flavonoids, so things like fisetin, quercetin, piperlongamine, those do have a positive impact on clearing out senescent cells. So James Kirkland at the Mayo Clinic, he did work, and even though we don't exactly know what's going on in all ways, like in all tissues, they did see that people that were on this protocol of doing a senescent clearing protocol, so you take these senolytic drugs or compounds twice a month, or 2 days out of a month, excuse me, then they had improvements in gait speed, less joint issues. There's been some work in cognition that better brain performance in some ways. So we're now seeing signs that this is meaningful in humans. More work needs to be done. There's multiple pharmaceutical companies out there exploring, capitalizing on this knowledge to, maybe improve upon absorption, safety profile, efficacy. And some of them are public. But yeah, they're even looking into a senolytic vaccine that would find and attack senescent cells and cause them to clear that way. So lots of cool stuff in that space.
Damn, that's awesome. There's so much going on. Where does stem cells come into it? Like, we're talking about Qualia stem cell today. Where does stem cells come into it? Maybe give a basic overview of what stem cells are for people who don't know what it is, and then how your product helps.
Yeah, stem cells are super cool. They are these special cells in the body that can make copies of themselves and turn into other tissue. So those two things, keep those two things in mind. They will make a copy of themselves, and those are called daughter cells. And then they can also become any type of tissue in the body. So they are a major part of the body's repair system. And what they do is they replace worn out, damaged tissue throughout life. And they can basically supply any type of tissue in the body. And, from an evolutionary perspective, because I always like to look at that first, they did not exist, most likely, for the first 3 billion years after life started. That we still had single cells working to figure out how to optimize their efficiency. And in fact, it's one of the 4 major epochs of human evolution is cellular development. So these cells first started on their own. And after about 3 billion years, then we saw multicellularity. So cells came together and started to work together. So they would share communication signals back and forth to each other. And over a 200 million year period, the sophistication of that fleet became more robust. So not only were they just aggregating and sharing resources, but now you saw the beginning of cellular specialization. So instead of every cell doing the exact same thing, the cells collectively made decisions to say, all right, you do this function, I'm going to do this function. So this cell became this type of tissue, and this cell became this type of tissue. And that each time there was a major advancement like that, it enabled the organism to procure resources in its environment more efficiently than its competitors, and that outlive its competitors that couldn't do those features. And so once we saw cellular specialization, and that's when we saw had the need for a renewable pool of undifferentiated cells, right? Undifferentiated mean they haven't turned into tissue. And so that those cells could replace the specialized cells that had died off. And so, evolution basically created stem cells as a tool to manage complexity of living systems. And, we're the beneficiary of that. So that's the origin of where they came from. And then, another important way to think about them is they're not all the same. They're defined by something called potency. So potency describes what they can basically become in the human body. And you've got 5 different categories of potency. So pluripotent or totipotent, these can form any cell in the body. So a zygote can form any single cell in the human body. Then you have further down that potency list, you have what's called multipotent, oligopotent, or unipotent. And these cells can only become certain types within certain lineages. So an example, a fairly common one, and your listeners might have even have heard this before, but hematopoietic stem cells. These are stem cells that come from your bone marrow. But they can only generate a few types of cells in the body. They can't make neurons, they don't make muscle, but they do make blood, and they make your immune cells. And they do that across these lineages, a myeloid, lymphoid lineage. So the myeloid lineage that comes from your bone, that's going to make all the things that you're going to measure on a blood test. Red blood cells, platelets, monocytes, things like that. Granulocyte stimulating cells, so things like basophils, neutrophils, all those. Right? You get that long list, you look at your counts, those are made by stem cells in your bone marrow. But bone marrow also makes your lymphoid lineage, that's your beta cells, your T cells, your natural killer cells, that's your immune system, right? So earlier we talked about totipotent, pluripotent, and that can make any cell in the body. And now we're moving down, as you move down that potency list, what that type of cell can make narrows, right? It narrows. And so then you could have like oligopotent, they can make fewer things. Like they can't make immune cells, but they can make different bone cells. And then you have unipotent cells, and they can only make one type, but they can still self-renew. So they still demonstrate the characteristics of a stem cell. They can self-renew and they differentiate. An example of that would be like a muscle satellite cell. So you can see you have different types of stem cells, all of which can self-renew and differentiate, but some types can make everything, and on the other end of that spectrum, some types can only make one thing. So that's important, because when you talk about stem cells, the idea that you could take out, bone marrow and have it make anything in the body, you see now that's not true. That's not
Right.
true.
Could you help us understand the controversy? Like what is some of the controversy around stem cells and stem cell research in general, and what's founded and what's not founded from your perspective? Because it's an opinion, obviously, but
yes. So, gosh, a lot of that controversy has to do with humans being humans. So because there's such excitement around the potential of what stem cells can do, there have been companies that have offered those solutions ahead of evidence that merits their distribution, right? That doesn't even mean that those things can't become valuable solutions in the future. But because they're powerful, you do run the risk of, we know that certain stem cell activities are tumorigenic, right? They can increase cancer risk in the body. And of course, you might be overfixating and indexing your hope that stem cell, that you're going to just inject them into your bloodstream and they're going to fix an issue. And a lot of that was occurring with the FDA cracked down on was simply, enthusiastic people, oftentimes not very scientific, offering these solutions to vulnerable people. And on the other end of that spectrum is that you have good scientists that know there are credible ways to address problems. And the FDA can be very slow in approving it. It doesn't neatly fit into therapeutic buckets by which products get approved. There's all sorts of like restriction that, like they're in Japan, they are using something called Muse cells, which is a type of stem cell, very exciting, discovered by a Japanese scientist. And those are not tumorigenic. They can support tissues throughout the body. So they are pluripotent. And I think there's great potential there, not only for those cells to fix issues, but maybe even to slow the damage accumulation that naturally occurs with aging. Now, that is a perspective of hope and optimism, not totally grounded in steep evidence that supports that. But what we know about the mechanisms is really exciting. So there's natural excitement. There was, I would say, unethical behavior. I mean, some of those early people that were promoting, cures with stem cells, they went onto the FBI's most wanted list. There's been quite a lot of controversies with it all. What I would say now is, particularly with the rise of geroscience, which geroscience is the scientific exploration of ways to slow aging, essentially. Stem cells is definitely an area that is very hot and is probably going to be one of the areas that gets the most attention soonest. So for example, Altos Bioscience or Altos Labs is a company that raised $3 billion in their first round of funding, I think. They hired several Nobel Prize winners. They brought in Morgan Levine from Yale. And they're like, we're just going to go after this big. And we're going to try to use Yamanaka factors, which I can describe what those are. But these are genes that you can take a cell and you can reprogram it back. You can de-differentiate it, right? It's like a muscle cell, and you could turn it back into a stem cell. And that's the idea of being able to do that, means that you could take, instead of harvesting stem cells just from particular tissues, like your bone marrow or fat, you could take a skin cell and you could maybe engineer it to become a pluripotent stem cell that is yours. So you're not going to deal with any immune issues of putting it back into your body, which happens when you take other people's stem cells and do that. So yes, there's a lot of really cool science. I will say that while Shinya Yamanaka did win the Nobel Prize for his discovery of what became known as Yamanaka factors, a really important thing to remember is that only 0.01% of the cells that he put into the dish were actually reversed into pluripotency. So just to keep the scale in mind, like, I don't know how engineers are going to be able to bioengineer around that, but some companies are working on it. Like, all right, how can we accelerate that process? And then there's also things like stem cell banking. So you take your cells while they're young and fresh, you put them into deep storage, deep cold storage. And then when you need them, you have a reservoir of your own cells that you could put back into the body to heal tissue Who knows what else we discover? The thinking now is that you probably do not need to do that. With the technology we have now, we can take cells at whatever time of life out of view, and the future will show that we can harness those with as much efficacy as using cells from 70 years ago that you banged.
So what's the difference then between someone, I'm going to go down to Mexico, get stem cells shot in my back, and all of a sudden I'm like a 20-year-old again, and the supplement product that Qualia offers?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Right. So, it's a big topic. And so stem cell, most of them in the clinic was taking hematopoietic stem cells or mesenchymal stem cells out of the body. And if you were going to, just going into detail, let's say you wanted to get some bone marrow stem cells, you could go to your iliac crest, you perform a procedure, you aspirate some cells out of your marrow from your pelvis, and then those are essentially injected back into you. And then the stem cells, maybe we should do this because I think it's really helpful. Like, just talk about the life cycle of a stem cell, because it actually really would feed into the conversation around like the nutrition, the supplement products that we created. And it's interesting too. So, and I think it helps to understand this when you're thinking about whether or not you may want to participate in stem cells yourself at some point. So overall, we talked about these different potencies, and you have stem cell pools throughout the body, right? You have intestinal stem cells, neural stem cells, you have mesenchymal, there's lots of different types. And they usually start out in this protected environment called a niche. So, the bone marrow for blood stem cells, it's in niche, and it's getting signals from its neighboring cells, things like adhesion molecules and soluble factors that keep them quiet. And it turns out that stem cells staying in this quiet, quiescent state is actually really important for what we're really trying to promote, which is stem cell homeostasis. If you overactivate your stem cells, always telling them to wake up and leave, you exhaust your stem cell supply. You want to keep them quiet until they're needed. Okay, so that's the first step, right? When your body does need stem cells, then these growth factors, like they're a couple different types, but they're colony stimulating factors. So you have granulocyte colony stimulating factor, you have granulite macrophage colony stimulating factor. These activate the stem cells, okay? So imagine this, they're sleeping in bed and they've been tucked into bed and they're quiet and they're resting. And then, mom comes in and says, okay, time to wake up. And that is activating them. That's these, the colony stimulating factors. And then what happens is, once that happens, these enzymes and signaling proteins loosen their grip of the stem cells in their niche so that they can enter into circulation. And another thing that happens once a stem cell is woken up is that they can undergo something called proliferation. So they now start to replicate and divide, and you make more of them. So you have an ample amount of stem cells that can make it into the circulation. Okay. So how do they then get from, bone marrow into wherever they need to go, or your fat, so the mesenchymal stem cells, into become a muscle cell or a, part of your connective tissue? Well, they don't just wander aimlessly, but they follow a scent trail that is made by chemokines. So there's this axis called CXCR4 SDF1. And I'll explain what both of those do. But SDF1 is like a beacon. I was thinking about this, and this image came to mind, and I like it. So remember from Jurassic Park, when I need to actually go back and look to see who it was, but there was a T-Rex that was going to eat a kid, and a guy grabbed the flare and he gets the attention of the T-Rex, and he starts running away. So the T-Rex chases him. Okay. That's SDF1. That is this beacon. And the CXCR4 is a receptor on the stem cell. So now we've turned a stem cell into a T-Rex, and it's going to now follow that beacon, right? And once the stem cell gets closer to its place of final destination, then these adhesion molecules like L-selectin and integrins, they help the molecules slow down and stick to vessels so that they can move into the tissue where the repair needs to happen. And then once they get inside of that local tissue, various growth factors, even signals from the extracellular matrix, they now will basically they will trigger these signaling cascades and these signaling cascades have funny names like Notch and Hedgehog and Wnt. They're ancient from when stem cells started. And those then will cause the activation of transcription factors inside the cell. So you've got these growth factors outside of the stem cell that initiate signaling pathways that then cause changes inside the cell. And remember, all of our cells have all of our DNA, but you don't want all of your DNA to be expressing proteins haphazardly. You want your cells to make specific tissue. And so this is the process whereby this undifferentiated cell that isn't anything yet becomes something specific and has functions that we want. And so once these transcription factors are now activated, remember, a transcription factor can go bind to DNA sequences and say, make this protein and don't make this protein. And you have these reinforcing loops of activity that then is locked in by epigenetics. So once that process starts, epigenetics come in and it locks in the cell identity. And now if you're a muscle cell, you're not making a neuron or a fat tissue, you're making a myocyte, you're making your muscle tissues. That is the process. So you can see it's very dynamic. There's lots of different stages. There's lots of different types of stem cells. All of that matters, particularly when you're thinking about designing a product that is going to support that system. And that's, I think, valuable to understand that. And what I'll say is that even though I think of clinical stem cell treatments very differently than the supplemental ones, it's not like us versus them. If I was getting stem cell treatments, and I might for an existing Achilles issue that's been bothering me for a long time, then I would definitely take our product at the same time, because a lot of what we are trying to do is try to make the environment for stem cells to land and differentiate healthier.
Got it.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm glad you did that entire process too.
Okay, good. I hope that wasn't too much, but
no, it kind of helps us understand. Yeah. Good. I'd love to move into our lab section a little bit here and talk about the product specifically, like what's in the product, what's the research that went into it, like how does it specifically help with some of the pathways that you just described, and just tell us a little bit more about the stem cell product.
Yeah. So, and one of the reasons why I wanted to join Qualia is because I really like the scientific approach that they take from beginning to end. And I don't even know what the end is, but beginning until full maturity, we'll say. But let me start there. So the scientific process begins with understanding, again, the life cycle. Remember, go back to the Qualia nootropic. Like, how do we support the entire system that is performing this operation that we care about? And how do we nudge an outcome that we care about versus, again, overriding it? And so in this case, what we just discussed, that life cycle of stem cells, which is really just a sliver of the reality of with all the thing that's going on. That's like the fundamental information. That is where we would start. Then you do a screen of all different research compounds. What do we know from the literature? And how does that research group, how do you bucket it? Is it human clinical trials? Is it preclinical work? Is it just a petri dish? All of which can be interesting to some degree, but you then work with that information for months. And the product team is multiple PhDs led by an ND who's been in the industry for 30 years. And they create, the amount of research that they do and the write-ups, they're very impressive. Hundreds of pages, actually, analyzing every single study. And not just looking at the abstracts, but looking at, does this graph actually say what the authors say, even after the peer review process? Or we're not even trusting the peer review process. We're using our own minds on that team to say, should this be something that we could include in our goals, right? And so you start by looking at, in this case, probably 50 products to 100 in that range. And then we narrowed it down to 15. And this is the art of formulation, where you debate, argue, advocate in your team for why we would include X, Y, and Z. And then that's where it comes together. And so that's a high level of how we did this. But, starting with an understanding of our goals for the product, down to the research, then a selection. And then at that point, we also, as a company, something that I'm proud about, I've not had a hand in it, but it's one of the reasons why I wanted to join, is that we do research on our products in people. And it starts with usually something very basic, like a survey, which is a great place to start. What do you feel when you took this product for 4 days? Do you feel a change in energy? Do you see a change in your hair, skin, and nails? Like, just collecting before and after over a few days. Not the highest reliability of data, but a great place to start. When I say reliability, right, it's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial that gives you very high confidence in the results, but it is also the right place to begin. Then you might go into a single-blinded study where, the researcher knows what the person is getting, but the person doesn't. And then we move into, oftentimes doing several double-blind placebo-controlled trials. The last step of that is we kind of think of our products like SaaS products. Like a product isn't locked in forever. If you notice, like with our Qualia product, I think we're on the third version of it. We already have for our public-facing products now new versions that we're working on. So that is monitoring the science, looking to see if there's a way to make it more efficacious. We want to evolve with the evolving research landscape with our products too. So that gives you a sense of like how we see things. And I think that's the right way to go as a supplement company. Chloe, working in the pharmaceutical space, you and I both have done that. You will never see that level of clinical research in supplements that you will with pharmaceutical drugs. And it's unfair, it's unfortunate, but what pharmaceutical companies do, they will spend $1 billion to try to create a novel compound that they can generate monopoly profits on, right? They can work an entire therapeutic area and they can dominate that. And if it takes they go through massive phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. It's just a different game. But because we're working with natural products, we can't protect it like pharmaceuticals can and then charge, pretty exorbitant fees. Like there are some stem cell products. They are $3 million per dose.
Dude, that's insane.
Yeah.
What kind of results would you get from a product like that? If you're paying $3 million per dose, like what's happening?
You're curing the disease for some of these. Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. Cystic fibrosis is one where I forget the drug names, but there's a couple of different blood-related disorders where once you give the treatment one time, then it cures the condition. And so I would like to look into this more, like who pays for that? Would the insurance company, knowing what we know about insurance, they would fight tooth and nail to not pay for that. So does the patient have to? Is it worth it for them if you're getting, 300% more life? There's all sorts of interesting logistical, practical, ethical questions that come up with that. But yes, so not to go too much on a tangent, but that's just these companies work in different ways, and judging the evidence base of a supplement company by the standards of a pharmaceutical company, it'll never happen because the remuneration incentives are not there. And maybe that's a good thing because you can then also buy these products at an accessible fee.
This is a debate that we get into, or not a debate, but something we get into a lot here. And it does beg the question then, what we're describing here are stem cell therapies, not stem cell supplement. Those are two different things. And there is a lot of research like you're describing and benefits of stem cell therapies, like what we've been talking about. I have not seen as much on like oral supplementation or supplements in general.
Right.
In a collective individual ingredient, sure. But there's composition bias and like the borrowed science, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yet. So what is your guys' perspective on your perspective and Qualia's perspective on creating a stem cell supplement? It's not a stem cell therapy, a stem cell supplement, even though there's not a ton of research on that quite yet.
Yeah, we are aiming to support the health of your stem cell system. We're not manipulating the stem cells in a particular way that is going to do something that is unnatural and possibly very effective for a particular condition. So you're right. So there's different degrees here. On one end, the most sci-fi, highest cost pharmaceutical solution is curative with manipulating stem cells for a particular purpose. The more common yet still expensive is the medical stem cell therapy. Take out your own, maybe use Muse cells, maybe use technology that can create pluripotent stem cells out of some tissues like that. That's much more common. And then that's pretty costly. And not all of that is allowed. That's why people will have to go to the Central America to try to get those therapies done where they are accessible. Although there is a new law in Florida, which is interesting. It's an advancement. There's a new law that was passed, and I'll mention this real quick, and we'll go back to the Qualia products, but it's Senate Bill 1768. So it went into effect July of this year, and it allows licensed physicians, so MDs, DOs, to offer certain stem cell treatments that are not yet approved by the FDA. But there are restrictions on that too. So it's only in orthopedics or wound care, pain management. And then they also have to comply with certain guidelines. So they must come from an FDA registered facility, because there have been people that have died from stem cells and it's just due to contamination. Like some of the things that you hear about nasty side effects, including somebody dying, is not necessarily due to the stem cells themselves, but just because they were in a facility that had contaminated product. So it has to come from an FDA registered facility. It's got to meet these quality standards. Patients have to be given informed consent. So you have to read to them something that says you're taking a risk, and they have to sign that. They have to acknowledge it. And there also has to be some pretty clear disclaimers in advertising. But yeah, so like in a way, it's a real advancement. And I think what it's going to do is going to turn Florida into a destination for medical tourism. So people know for at least certain conditions won't have to leave the United States. They can stay in the United States. But then there's a whole host of things that people are going to try to do outside of the United States still. So yeah, so that's good. I think it's an advancement. People can make their own choices on that. And there are also restrictions in place that limit what you can do this for. But it was a very interesting change in the laws just this year. Okay, so that's like, these crazy stem cell manipulating technologies that are curing disease. They're very specific. They're very rare. It's not all of them, but stem cells are well suited for that. And some pharma companies are working in those spaces. Then there's the majority of just trying to regenerate some injured tissue in midlife, oftentimes. And then there's the supplement space. So, health is really looking to support the natural process and not try to like manipulate or override it. We're supporting the natural function of stem cells. That's the goal. And their job that was described by evolution to do a particular function. That's what we're doing. And with our ingredients, remember, we talked about all sorts of categories of activities for stem cells. There's the proliferation, making more of them. There's activation, which is waking them up from their bed and from their quiescent state. There's mobilizing them, right? Getting them into circulation. There's migration, then having them migrate into the specific tissues. Then there's the differentiation process. There's also self-renewal, right? That's a key feature of a stem cell, is for its ability to actually make another version of itself. And then there's protection, right? Protecting them. And a lot of this comes down to, there's a variety of things. All of those things are goals. And what you would find, it would be onerous and probably unproductive. The main idea here is that we do have 15 different products or ingredients, and a lot of those ingredients are contributing to different parts of that process. They might support activation and mobilization and migration. Others might support differentiation. Others might support protection. And so that's what we're trying to do. The other really key piece of this is that it's a 4-day cycle. We are not trying to stimulate stem cells every day, all day. And I think those who try to do that don't fully respect and understand how stem cells work. Remember, that's a really fast way to exhaust stem cells. And stem cell exhaustion is one of the hallmarks of aging. So the key things one of the reasons why stem cells become exhausted is because of higher levels of inflammation, right? This is one of the reasons why our senolytic product and our stem cell products, I think, go hand in hand, because you're trying to remove with the senolytic, you're trying to remove the factors that are driving excess inflammation. One of the factors, there are more than one for sure. And then follow on to that after you do your senolytic cycle and you let the inflammatory markers settle back down, you would do your stem cells. And because inflammation is interfering with all different parts of the functioning of healthy stem cells, you now are in a place where you should be better off to have these stem cells proliferate, migrate, differentiate, and stay healthy. So 4 days a month is what we do, and and then you want to let them rest again. So that's kind of how we think about it.
So in relation to how you think about it, there's some research around before we dive too deep into this, I just want to highlight, you guys really do a great job on research. I mean, you even have stuff actually on clinicaltrials.gov, which the number of companies that say they do clinical trials and you can't find it. Not that every clinical trial has to be on clinicaltrial.gov necessarily, but the fact that there are some that you guys have on there is impressive just at a baseline. Thanks. Some of the research that you guys have done is on the senolytic product that you're describing. I haven't seen a ton other than a pilot study, which has some very interesting language in it. one way to say 20%, this helped 20% of people. Another way to say it is it didn't help 80%. So like that's marketing language there. What is your opinion on that? Especially as someone who comes from hard science and now you have to think about, okay, getting products and marketing language and general consumer and all this stuff. How do you guys decide that?
Yeah. So again, I think the way to really interpret it is in stages and steps. So do we have a full complement of research from surveys to double-blind placebo-controlled trials out now? No, but we're continuing to run those studies. So we're building the evidence base while the product is even out in the market. But the first step is the survey that we have done. And that's what we always start with, right? Is just what do people say about taking it, right? It's important to collect, even though it's not as sort of reliable, it's still really important to collect. And it's why I think it's the right place to start. And so in this study, with this survey, we ask people questions like, do you have any improvements in energy? Do you see any improvements in your like hair, skin, and nails? Do you notice sore joints feeling less sore? The fact that we see anything over a 4-day period, I was actually pretty impressed with. Now, there could be confirmation bias. There could be placebo. We know that you're taking something for a particular purpose, then we know the placebo effect is real, and it could all be around that, what we're seeing so far. We have to keep that in mind. That's a fair appraisal of where we're at right now. What I think is more likely is that a multi-month course of this would yield more significant effects that are real. And it's not to say that the early effects aren't real. Like an improvement in energy is cool. Is that due to some of the nutraceutical compounds promoting alertness and blood flow, or is it actually a stem cell effect? So I think that after having exposure to this in the cycle dynamics that we recommend, so once a month for a period of time, then we'll start to see, does a significant amount of people start to report changes in joint soreness, stiffness? Because as you get older, getting out of bed, you feel stiff for the first hour before you feel more lubricated, right? That's just a natural part of getting older, at least in modern society. And so that's what I'm eager to see. I will add this caveat that there's a term that I made up called the meaningful but invisible, where let's say you had a 20% improvement in joint stiffness. If you're not getting objective information on that, if someone guaranteed a 20% improvement in joint stiffness, you'd be like, yeah, I'm totally going to do that. But you might acclimate to that effect where you don't see it because it took a while for it to happen. It doesn't happen immediately. So any supplement that offers an immediate benefit is a more favorable condition for people to continue to take it. I have created this categorization in my mind of the products that we make. So you have what I call health performance products, health span products, and health support products. So health performance is anything that's going to help you perform at something now. Our nootropic helps you think today. Our sleep product helps you sleep tonight. It is helping you perform at a health-related activity that you are about to do. Then our health span products are things that are working on mechanisms that we think are valuable and interesting. But how do you really detect a less steep decline? It's really hard.
Yeah, you got to track it over time, which is tough. Which I think would be cool eventually with like biometric devices and things like that, like Whoop and Aura and stuff, but it's not exactly there yet. So I see your point.
It's hard, right? Am I in the top 50% compared to my age-matched cohort? Like that's where objective data can really help us see, like, all right, I'm in this phase of life where homeostasis or decline in the ability to maintain homeostasis is a characteristic of aging. And so am I just doing better than my friends? Am I doing better than I was previously? So you have a within person, your self-comparison, you have a comparison amongst your group, and some people are very sensitive to understanding benefits that they are experiencing. And other people can have 100% improvement and they still don't see it because they're just not as attuned to their own bodies. But that's where objective data can really help. And so that's why I'm proud that we will continue to work on generating not just one study that's favorable towards what we want to do, but we are dedicated to clinical research on our products in an ongoing fashion. And then we got to start all over because we'll probably come out with the next version of it. Then we do it again. So I
You
think,
can see that on your website too, that you guys have a process of first there's the pilot where you're doing some observational stuff, then you're doing some clinical stuff, like with your different products and stuff. It's not there, which my biggest question, because we're talking
yeah,
about the stem cell product today, is it's not there today.
yeah,
However, on the landing page of the stem cell, on the stem cell page, it says promotes natural healing recovery, supports tissue and muscle repair, boosts total body vitality, and supports oxidative stress defense, which based on the stated level of scientific or the studies that you guys have done so far on this specific product are a stretch at best. So I'm just curious on what your guys is. What's that debate? Like, how do you guys figure that out? Mark, the CMO versus the health officer. Like, how does that
yeah.
happen? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so that comes from the research on the ingredients independent of our formulation. But you bring up a good point. Could our formulation, is it doing the same thing? Can we really make those claims? But what we do is, again, since these aren't compounds that we own, they're compounds that have other research on them. If you've seen a couple of clinical trials in humans that have looked specifically at fatigue, muscle aches, things like that, then that's where we generate that story. And I'm always open to hearing people offer criticisms. I think ultimately every individual needs to come down to, what do you feel comfortable with? And then a company needs to say, what's practical in terms of what's best in the space we work in? And let's do that. And then individuals have to determine what's right. And there's always, for them, and there's always this tension between marketing and what marketing wants to say to get people interested, and then what we can, sort of what passes the red face test. Like, is there any evidence for this doing this thing? But we, run everything by compliance. We stay away from any language around curing anything. It's a lot of our ambition is really, like I said, just to support the natural, healthy function of these things that we're doing. But yeah, that is my unvarnished take on where we stand on all of this stuff, in terms of our claims, our process. And I don't think it's going to change, right? Like, that's just the deal that we have to make with society, is like, we're not going to do 5 to 10 years of research on a product before we launch it, but we are going to be and I'll also say one other thing that's in defense is that when you are using natural products at levels that are familiar in nature, then you have a different degree than if you're introducing a synthetic, never before seen by the human body compound that does need a lot more safety validation. Doesn't mean that you can't hurt yourself with a natural compound. The natural fallacy is real, but there is evolutionary familiarity with these compounds. So I think it's a little bit of a different game when you're using nutraceuticals in reasonable amounts to try to support health versus cure.
The amounts are something I see a lot, because you'll see in relation to this compensation fallacy that you're describing, where if the individual ingredients have evidence that back its benefits, then a formulation that combines all of those ingredients automatically means that it is more effective, or it is equally or more effective, or whatever. The thing, like you were talking about earlier with the initial Qualia Mind product, is how big those horse pills were. And there's only so much space for supplements, right? To put so many grams or micrograms or whatever milligrams into each individual thing. And so then, and there's 15 ingredients. And so if it's 1,500 micrograms that was in the study, that individual ingredient, right? But there's only 100 or 1,000 micrograms of space in the pill.
Yeah.
Then the clinical, what was researched that got to the benefits of that individual ingredient may not actually be in the formulation that has 14 other things that also need their space inside the single pill. And that's where I kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit, because it's just like, this, is that an optimal dose, or is it just, it's in there, but the study that you're claiming the benefits came from that individual ingredient had 10 times more of it inside the thing.
Yeah, we comment on that specifically, like in our research documents, like this is a dose that is less than what was used in this particular clinical trial, and why. So you have two issues that you bring up, which are good, that you can concentrate something where it is essentially acting like a drug because it's way more than what you would get in nature. And a really interesting one for me that I was thinking about this morning is creatine. Like, a diet that comprises foods high in creatine you're going to get a couple of grams per day. And we're now seeing evidence that 20 grams a day might be really beneficial for brain aging. That's interesting, but you're almost now using a pharmaceutical dose for that. It's still categorized as like a nutraceutical product. On the other side, I think you're too young probably to remember a product called Hot Stuff, but it was sort of the joke of the industry because it literally had like 150 ingredients in it and it tasted like crap. And it was this powder that just, if something became popular, they just threw it in there in like a micro amount and it was around for years, like it duped people.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. There is, however, also this idea of like an entourage effect and this is something that we do think about a lot, where the dose needed of a particular ingredient lowers when you're supporting a system in other ways. And in fact, the pharmaceutical industry is catching on to this. And the example that I'll provide is in the GLP-1 category drugs. So, the first ones that came out were the semaglutides, et cetera. Those were targeting one target, right? GLP-1. Then the next one, like tirzepatide that came out, was GLP-1 plus GIP, they had two targets. And then the third one, the next generation, are targeting another category, glucagon. So they have GLP-1, they have GIP and glucagon, and they're even more effective. And the amount of compound that is targeting each different receptor is lowering. So you're actually seeing greater efficacy with lower doses across different parts of the system. And that is something that we've been playing with for a while. And so, when you create a formulation, you really don't know what's having the effect, but what you can hopefully assess is the net effect in people, right? There might be things in there that are detracting from the experience.
Right. That's fair. I mean, this is one of the best arguments I've heard for this concept. This is good. I like having research to support this entourage effect would be outside of observational studies and surveys would be awesome. Not that that's bad. Again, you guys are doing better than like 99% of the people we talk to, but that is, I've not heard this defense before. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll actually give you an example that was really important to my thinking in my career. When I worked in doing cancer research for Dr. Ornish, his interventional program for people with prostate cancer was diet, exercise, stress management, interpersonal communication with your spouse, individual therapy, meditation, right? It was all of these things. And the criticisms that
That's
paper,
amazing.
Yeah, it's great, right? The criticisms that he received was, well, how do you know what's having the effect? Who cares ultimately if you're showing an effect greater than what else is out there? And this is something that I'm actually going to write about in my book. The gold standard RCT, randomized controlled, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, those are really suited to help us understand what's having an effect, which is really important if you are trying to it's really understand why something's happening when you want to manipulate it and create a pharmaceutical. That's
fair
not
enough.
Spiritual.
I see where you're going with this. This is interesting.
Yeah. And it's not even bad. Like, don't get me wrong.
No.
RCTs are great, but they are not complete. What I would like
you're
to see,
so right.
I want to see competition trials. This is a term that I've made up. Imagine this. All right, let's go down this rabbit hole. It's pretty fun. So imagine this. You have Duke versus UCLA versus Stanford versus Harvard. And the goal is to take a group of people that are around the same degree of, let's say, diabetes. And you're going to then create a team of experts. You're going to have people that are in AI and, system biology. You're going to have your sleep medicine expert. You're going to have your nutritionist. You form your team at your university, and we're going to compete on the greatest degree of outcome that we can generate for a fixed amount of money, let's say, right? Like you can only spend $1,000 over 6 months on this person. Those are the constraints of the trial. What you do is up to you and your team to say, how do we get the greatest degree of impact across the greatest amount of people? And we don't have studies like that, right? Where at any moment in time, like today, our level of knowledge is here, and tomorrow it's going to be there, and the next day it's going to be here. But who is now putting all of that together to say, what is the most efficacious approach? That's left up to the clinician to say, all right, I'm going to try to figure that out. Why not? Why can't research teams do that and then create protocols, right? To say, how do we get the greatest degree of impact? Now,
this is amazing.
Yeah, it's a new type of research that also has limitations, just like every other line of research, and is, I think, majorly missing. translational, prospective, RCT, and then competition trials. And there are more too, but add that one in, and now we're going to figure out how to do the most good per person.
That would be awesome.
We need this. That's incredible.
We need this definitely. Let's start bringing this in for landing. One of the questions we like to ask people is about the future. What do you think the future for your guys' stem cell products, what we're kind of talking about today, but Qualia in general?
Yeah. So I want us to continue to, from a 10,000 foot level view, are we doing the best possible job in the space we operate? Are we, formulating our products in the right way, both from like the scientific and the art perspective of it? Are we testing them in the right way? Are we honest with our marketing? So a big part of like the way that we see ourselves is a supplement formulation company and an education company. Like we also want to get out information. And there's a girl on my team, Ginny Robards. She's worked with me at Human OS. She's a phenomenal writer. Her information is both accurate, but the way that she describes stuff, whatever we're talking about, is all about the person reading it. That's our mission, is that we're not going to just try to sound smart ourselves. We want you to feel smarter and more capable by engaging with our work. It's about you, not us, right? We are at service to you. And so that is a big part of what we care about. Then I think refining these categories of, health performance, health span, health support, and then continuing to make a suite of products that are addressing real needs and opportunities. So a need would be something like people aren't getting enough of this in society, and we need to help with that. It is a formulation and it's the marketing to get people knowledgeable so they have motivation to do it. They all tie together. And then I would like to see us, like we're thinking about a biological age study ourselves, where it would be us using a multitude of our products. So if you think of our formulations, they've got many ingredients in them. Now we're going to actually be using multiple products over a period of time to say, can we slow the pace of aging? And could we even, reverse biological aging to a certain degree? So yeah, contributing meaningfully to the health span, longevity space. And I think we'll be in that zone for a while. That's our future. Wow. Beyond that, there are lots of, biotech, pharma companies that are trying to intervene more powerfully. And I'm cheering for all of them. If it meant that one of our products went out of, was no longer viable because a better solution came, but it was helpful to humanity, good, right?
Oh yeah.
Good.
I like that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're here for. We want to have an effective business, keep doing our things, but it's not based just off one product. We are mission driven. That's what we're about. So I'm cheering I don't see competitors. I see, other people who are part of the crusade and trying to help people live healthier lives longer.
Hell yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. The last question we always ask everyone is the previous guest leaves for you. And it's funny that you mention other biotech, nanotech, neurotech type things, because this one's from the founder of Neurode, which is a brain stimulation device and a brain monitoring device, one of the first ever for ADHD. So I think it makes sense. Chloe, do you want to ask this one, considering you are the one with ADHD?
Yeah, absolutely. What is something you know now through your life experiences, with the non-obvious, unexpected stuff about building a company?
Okay, about building a company. Yeah, interesting question. I think you have to live what you do. I think operating from a place where, you're not deeply involved yourself, it's hard to understand the situation well enough to outcompete other people that are in your space. You have to have so much passion for what you're doing, and you have to understand it. And so that can't just be an intellectual ivory tower exercise. You have to try to live it. So when I left Restore Hyper Wellness, I started doing coaching, and I was working with a select group of people, and I missed it, right? Because so much of my writing and my work and my speaking, it was outward. But then I got to work with individuals where they would describe the problem that they were facing, that in a, entirely quotidian, it wasn't like a super hard problem to solve, but it was very specific to their lived experience. And it was so valuable. So, I would say, live it yourself, connect with the people if you can, right? I mean, certainly people can live maybe add a qualifier to that. There are very passionate people that work in biotechs and whatnot that are helping people that have a condition that they don't. But particularly with the wellness and lifestyle work that we do, do you have to be Brian Johnson where you're doing everything and measuring everything at all time? No, but you have to be engaged and try to always be working on what is your version of that, and then also connecting with individuals too to see what is someone else's lived experience around this. So I would say those couple of ideas are really valuable.
Beautiful. All right, and what's the question you want to leave for our next guest? You don't know who they are, but they're in the health and wellness space.
Okay. All right. So we don't know what they are, what they do. I would like to know why they got into doing what they do. So many things to choose in life. Focus on what made them want to say, I'm going to dedicate my life for the foreseeable future to helping in this area. I want to know that.
All right. We will ask them.
Cool.
From Dr. Dan. Cool. Well, we appreciate you hopping on and joining the Decision Lab. And in a couple of weeks, we'll have you back on as an expert, not just representing Qualia, but as in one of our expert interviews. So I'm excited for that, where we can talk about all sorts of different things that even past just the Qualia stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I'm really looking forward to that as well. We can connect after. We can come up with some cool ideas. I have a lot to say about a lot of things.
Yes, you do, quite eloquently and to a degree at which I don't know if my memory could remember some of the pathways that you have in your brain. So congratulations to you, my friend. But
thank you, sir.
Anywhere you'd like to send people, or any final thing you want to leave for people?
Yeah. Come check out qualialife.com. So we've got a great blog there. We're putting out a couple of articles a week. I think they're really helpful. Sometimes we cover all sorts of things, circular breathing to happiness, to gratitude. Like a lot of the things that are most popular on our blog are not related to our products. We are totally fine with that. It's also a part of what we do. Like a lot of the income the company makes is on the products we sell, but it's not the complete part of our mission. So go there, check it out. And I would say that's the best place to go.
Hell yeah. Cool. We'll drop that in the comments, or in the description, below as well, for everybody to check out. And I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you hopping on. It was a great conversation. Excited to chat with you again.
Yeah. Already looking forward to the next one. Glad you committee. Thanks. Yeah.
Peace.
Thank you so much. It was such a fun conversation.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chloe.
All right, party peeps, welcome to the lab results. Chloe's having some recording difficulties, so it's just me today. We're talking about the stem cell product, Qualia stem cell product that we just talked with Dr. Dan about, and our thoughts on how it went. From the conversation, it is apparent that they're doing the right stuff. I will say that. We talked to a lot of companies on here that are not even trying at all to do what Qualia is doing. So I got to give them props for that. Many, many, many of their products go through the consistent process that Dr. Dan talked about. They do some type of pilot study where they're doing surveys and talking to customers and doing a small sample. Then they're doing larger study. Then they're doing double-blind placebo-controlled study. Then they're doing the right stuff, and they have a consistent process for their products, which we've had to have talked to 20 or 30 supplement companies so far, and I have not seen something that consistent or that clear outline. Like, it's clear they have a process for this. Dr. Dan's background as a brain scientist is amazing as well. He's very detailed. You could probably tell in the conversation he knows what he's talking about at such depth. Like, it's wild. I can't wait to we're having him on as an expert for an expert interview as well to get deeper into some of the topics he touches on. But all that to be said, the stem cell product itself has not gone through all of the paces that some of their other products have gone through. And the stem cell supplementation, which was a big distinction that we are making, or that I was making in that conversation, does not have as much research or results behind it as traditional stem cell therapies, like Dr. Dan was talking about. So there is a clear difference between those two things. Stem cell supplementation is very new, and I think it could be important. I don't know that there's a humongous risk in trying it out. Obviously, talk to your doctor before and all the disclaimer stuff. But I think personally, as far as does this one pass the lab test, does the stem cell product pass the lab test? I think it needs more testing for me to give my stamp, the Decision Lab stamp of approval, like fully approved or whatever. They did send me some, and I am trying it. You can just literally right there, actually, if you're watching on YouTube. And so I'll report back on how that goes. So there's enough preliminary research and they have a proven track record with their other products that I feel comfortable trying it. And that's for me personally, would I actually buy this? I would, and to try it because I think it's interesting. So that's where I'm at. Like, does pass the lab test? They need some more. I think this specific product needs some more research, which they are doing, which is amazing. And then would I actually try this? Yeah, I would try it. I think there's enough preliminary research for me to want to try it. A big surprise in this one was Dr. Dan's perspective on clinical testing, research, like, and how there needs to be a, not alternative, but like a additional or like a new form of research that he's talking about. And that's going to be in his book. So I'm excited to talk to him more about that in the extra interview, because I agree. Like, we talk about this all the time on the pod. Like, people get to a point where they're like, okay, like, I get it. I'm a startup. I want to be transparent and I want to do research around this stuff, but like, it's so expensive. I could either put more money into marketing, which I can put $1 in and get 5 back out, or I could invest in research that is cool, but also not necessary for most people. And it's like, so it's this weird space. And so Dr. Dan had some interesting ideas on different types of research that could be done and different types of healthcare, like real healthcare, not sick care, that I'm interested in. And I thought those were really interesting to kind of chat about. And you can tell that, like, it's nice that Dr. Dan's on the board of Qualia, because you can tell that there's probably a battle with a lot of these companies between the marketers, the marketing team, the CMO type people, and someone like a Dr. Dan who's trying to like uphold the science. And I've seen this inside of companies before as well that we talk with. It's good that someone like Dr. Dan is on the board of Qualia, so that they can, that person is there able to kind of stand up for science in those marketing conversations. So that was good to see, I thought. So that's all I got for you. If you want to try out Qualia, they gave us a link for you guys to check out and a discount code. So check that out in the description below and go try it out. They have tons of other products as well. Might be interesting today was stem cells, but it might be interesting to talk about Qualia Mind. They have, I forgot all the other products they have. They have quite a few though. I think they're doing one that's coming out soon, or I saw a clinical trial for, was testosterone, something to do with testosterone. So some interesting stuff coming down the pipe. If you'd like us to talk to Dr. Dan or one of the founders about some of their other products, let us know. We'd love to have them back on and talk about different products. And if there are any other founders or any experts you want us to chat with and reach out to, drop them in the comments or DM us. We would love to hear from you guys. And if you like this no BS approach to like wellness, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. We'd love to see you there. And we're excited for our next conversation. I'll see you next time on The Decision Lab. Peace.